This webinar is designed to help woodland owners, foresters, natural resource professionals, researchers, and concerned citizens to learn more about forest health in the southeastern United States. Today, we'll welcome Dr. Kevin Chase. He is a research entomologist at Bartlett Tree Experts in Charlotte, North Carolina. He will provide a general overview of the symptoms, range, impact, and possible management strategies for treating live trees for Formosan termites in the southeastern U.S. And with that, and bear with me during this transition, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chase. Okay. Kevin, it is all yours.
Fantastic. Very good. Well, welcome everybody. Doing webinars is always a little bit funny, just because I love active participation. So feel free to, give Molly those questions throughout the talk. And Molly, if you want to interrupt me if there's something really important, I'm totally cool with that too. I did that at the last webinar I gave,
awesome.
And that worked out pretty well too.
That's a great idea. Okay.
Yep. So no worries at all. So just checking in, you can see my screen full screen.
It looks great.
Perfect. Very good. Well, we'll go ahead and get started then. So I've been with Bartlett Tree Experts for about a year now, and I came from the forest entomology world. So bark beetles and wood borers was really my thing. So coming onto the ornamental side of tree care was pretty new to me. So I've done a lot with scale insects, and of course, one of the big ones that I had to learn about within the past year and go and see for myself is Formosan termites. And a question that I get all the time is, do they actually attack living trees? We know that they attack structures. They're a major structural pest, and I'll show you some pictures here in a little bit. But the big question we're to get down to is, and I think you know the answer based on the topic slide, but we'll go ahead and answer those questions throughout. So we'll go ahead and start with, just a little bit of humor. I can't tell you, if you live in the southeast and in the coastal regions and Formosan termites in the area, this really is one of your nightmares that you have to deal with every year and every day, and they're just incredible. So this is from this year. This is actually a newspaper from Baton Rouge. Andrew Lloyd, he might be on right now. He's our plant pathologist at Bartlett Tree Experts. I think it was his mom that actually sent him this newspaper clipping. But I just love this. How does this sound for it? House for sale, large front porch with a panoramic view. It is an incredible structural pest, and there are literally houses that have just fallen apart because of this insect. So just to show you what some of the real world structural pest damage looks like. So in your bottom left-hand corner, you can just see that some of those beams are just heavily degraded. Your upper center, it just shows you how numerous they can be, and it shows you in that structural wood just how they occur. And then your bottom right-hand corner, it just shows you what some of their nests look like. So these nests are made with a combination of soil, some of their saliva, so their mucus, and then also some of their poo. So it doesn't sound like a fun place to live to me, but they really thrive in that environment and do quite well in it. In China, as the quote there that I have, they actually call it the house white ants, which I just found interesting, and use it for your next trivia. A little bit of just background information about the insect. So there's your Latin name for it, Coptotermes formosanus. It's known as the Formosan subterranean termite. So if you're familiar with the island of Formosa, it's also known as Taiwan. So if this was a public setting, I would have tried to quiz you on that. But hard to do here with a webinar. So yeah, the island of Formosa is in Taiwan. It's also native to Japan and China. And after World War II, when a lot of our troops were returning home, they packaged up cargo boxes and some of their food sources, as you see on the screen. And we believe that this is the main pathway, the main port of transportation, how Formosan termites got to the southeast. And when they arrived in Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, it was a very conducive climate for Formosan termites to spread. And we'll go over those climatic factors a little bit later, but they really felt like home when they arrived here. And we have seen that it also travels pretty well within the United States. So it readily transports inwood material, And one of the main ways that we've seen it is actually in old railway ties. So, maybe somebody wants to, around their gardenscaping, put up some railroad ties. There's plenty of them sitting around, but a lot of these railroad ties, they're buried in the ground and they're left there for a long time, and then they get moved around. So there's a case, which I'll also show some pictures of later, of a headline where railway ties were brought into York County, South Carolina, which is just below Charlotte, where I live, and we actually transported some Formosan termites. And then, of course, from an economical standpoint, it's really, really hard to actually quantify just how much they do. But even just from the structural industry, we know that, hundreds of millions of dollars annually are spent. And that report is from 1998. So I can only imagine how much it's increased since that report was put out. So here's that headline that I just talked about. This headline called them super termites, that they've moved into the Midlands of South Carolina. So that's kind of the central portion of the state. And then, they can say that they can eat your home 10 times faster than our native subterranean termites. It is fortunate as far as this specific instance in York County. We believe that population did not establish, not that we had anything really to do with eradicating it, but it just wasn't able to survive in York County, at least at that time period. And we haven't found any other Formosan termites. But across the Midlands, across central South Carolina anyway, that whole I-26 corridor, really from Columbia, South Carolina, over to the coast in Charleston, Formosan termites are very well established now. And the city of Columbia, they're really dealing with this insect now. Another place that they've made it to is Atlanta. Atlanta has really become a hotspot for Formosan termites. And this was an article that showed, that spray foam that they use to insulate houses. It's a pretty quick and arguably cheaper way of keeping your house hot or cold, and trying to reduce your energy bills. Well, it turns out that spray foam was really a perfect living space for Formosan termites. So this article just was talking about how Formosan termites are ravaging that city and how this may not have been the best tool to use as far as insulating a house because of Formosan termites. I just wanted to show a map of, the link is on there. This was just a pest management company, but I thought it was a really nice map, and I think they did a really good job of it. But just kind of shows you where we believe Formosan termites are at. So within Texas, pretty much going most of the way up to Oklahoma, all throughout Louisiana, and all along the coast up through the Carolinas. And then really within the past 20 years is where we've really seen it start to spread a little bit more inland. And as you notice, it's mostly along the coast. And that's really important because humidity is a really, really important factor for this insect. These insects will dry out very fast, and so they really can't thrive in areas where there's not high humidity. So if you think about areas that are high humidity, this map really shows that the southeastern United States is where the highest humidity is. And that's where we find these insects. Inland, you still have pretty high humidity. So these are actually dew points, which is a good measure of humidity. So if you're looking at some of the other plant diseases, something like, let's say, boxwood blight, same thing, they really thrive in high humidity weather. And these past couple of years that we've had, it's had a really high dew point really across the East Coast. So Formosan termites, they really thrive in these high humidity areas. And their biology, we'll talk a little bit more about mud tubes. Those mud tubes allow them to stay moist and in a high humid climate, even above ground. We do call them subterranean, which means below ground, but they've come up with a really clever way to come above ground and still stay in a humid environment. So I also wanted to talk about this structural damage that was done in New Orleans. So when Hurricane Katrina came, it was an absolutely devastating hurricane. A lot of the dikes and dams really collapsed. And a couple years before that event happened, Dr. Greg Henderson, who's pictured there, he was with the Louisiana State University, LSU, and he had actually inspected some of those dikes and dams and found that the seams of those dikes and dams were actually made out of sugarcane waste material. But it contains cellulitic waste material. which Formosan termites really thrive in. And he actually reported it to the city, and he said, we need to do something about this. So he actually suggested something called vetiver grass. And vetiver grass contains a compound called nootkatone, and this nootkatone has shown some repellency to Formosan termites. In Taiwan and across Asia, there's actually some areas that actually plant this grass as a repellent to keep Formosan termites away from certain structures. So, he recommended to the city of New Orleans that they inspect these dikes and dams and possibly plant some of this grass. They did not do anything about that. And I'm not here to blame the city of New Orleans, and I'm not here to say that, that they should be held accountable for this. But it's just really interesting to note that here we have this insect pest that we know is a structural pest and might have caused some extreme damage that really had a major effect on the city of New Orleans during that tragic event. So I put the American entomologist in there. If anybody doesn't have access to that and would like to read this article, it is really fascinating. Kind of just talks about humans and insects and management and planning. And I think it's a pretty important article. So I'm happy to give that to you if you'd like to see that. Oh yeah, there's our Formosan termite being repelled by the grass. Also, something cool to note, the University of Rhode Island recently did a test with that compound nootkatone, and there was also some repellency towards ticks. So that's something that I'm currently working with is if we could use a product that contains nootkatone to see if they also repel ticks. So that's just a side note. So if you're going to identify this insect, you may have noticed that I put at least one image of the Formosan termite. I'm a very visual learner, and I think repetition is a good thing. So I put one Formosan termite on at least every slide. And one thing that you'll really notice about it is its tear-shaped head. So on your left side, where it shows the heads of the soldiers, on the very left-hand side, there's a subterranean termite that, there's a bit of a curve at the top, but really not that teardrop shape. In the center is our Formosan termites, which is showing kind of the termite or the teardrop shape. I think the real images show a little bit better. And then your drywood termites, I would almost call rectangular. They're a bit more square. So just like everything else, you just need to spend some time looking at these insects and really learning how to identify them. But after you spend a bit of time with them, it's pretty easy to identify them. And something else that you'll notice about the Formosan termite is that their jaws, their mandibles, they often cross over. So in that image in the upper right-hand corner, you can see there's two soldiers next to the worker, and their mandibles are crossed. So that's something else to look for. Here's a picture of a kind of head-to-head comparison. Sorry, that's a terrible pun. On the left-hand side, that is our Formosan termite, so that tear-shaped head, and then there's that rectangle head of what I would call some of our native subterranean termites. And the wings are harder to identify. Another way to identify them is just the sheer number of soldiers that exist within a Formosan termite colony. So, if you're looking at a tree or a structure and you peel back some bark and you see some termites, if it's a Formosan termite, you're going to have a pretty quick response of a lot of soldiers because that colony contains about 5 to 10% soldiers, which is a much higher ratio than our native subterranean termites. I think, I'm not going to give you the exact number because I don't remember, but it's much lower and you're just not going to see as many. And something else that's really cool, I have a couple of videos, so I didn't want to include just another one, but they actually shoot, I shouldn't say shoot, but foam this white secretion out of their head, which is an acid that repels other insects or their attackers. So pretty unique insect, pretty cool. Things that you want to look for in trees. So here I'm giving myself away and saying that these things actually do get into trees. So again, with the soldiers in your upper left-hand corner and in your upper right-hand corner, this is a picture that I took in the city of New Orleans in City Park, right next to the art museum. There's a big old southern magnolia, and you can see those mud tubes really going up the tree, and they go out to the scaffolding limbs. So I think that's a great way to look for them, is just that really quick and easy tube. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, that's what we call a carton nest. So if you see that within a tree, you can be pretty darn sure that the Formosan termite has been established for a while. That's a classic symptom or sign of it. It might be a little bit harder to see, but in the bottom center, there's a spider web entangling, and during their alate flight period, you can just find these wing coverings just about in every spider web. So I think that's a really good way. If you're looking, if it's new to your city, this is a great way to monitor for them. Or if you just want to know if it's in your local neighborhood or around your house. I think this is a really important tool. Is whenever they're flying, just to look for their wing covers. And then looking in hollows of trees. So whenever they're flying and they're looking for a new colony site, this is just an absolute invitation for them to start a new colony. Are these open wounds in trees? And then there is their alate flight period. So if anybody has observed this, it is an absolute fascinating phenomenon to watch. I was fortunate enough to go down to New Orleans around the alate time period. I didn't see anything quite like this, but gosh, as the sun starts setting and those mini moons come on that we humans have created, these light sources, they really just congregate and flock to those areas. And it's I'm sick, right? I'm an entomologist. I think it's really cool. But if I owned a house and these things were flying around me, that would certainly make me nervous. And I understand why people really hate these insects. So I'm going to show a video. Earlier, the sound was not working with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Molly when it starts if she can hear it. If not, I will just go ahead and talk through it. But the gentleman that does the video, he does a really nice job of just explaining kind of the environmental conditions and when you can expect to see them. So Molly, can you hear it?
Unfortunately, no. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. That's right. So what the gentleman is talking about is simply that the Formosan termites are most likely to come out, especially for a big swarm, right after a rain event. So the time period that you're looking for this is right around Mother's Day. So that May time period is when you're going to look for the swarms, and right around the lights. I stole the mini moon thing from this gentleman. That was his thing. And you can see that lizard. It's having a feast on the Formosan termites, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to skip on past this. But yeah. So again, most importantly, let's see if I can. Yeah, there you go. So as you're shopping for your Mother's Day cards, that is really the time period to be looking for Formosan termite swarms. And if you have a big rain event and kind of an increase in temperature, and it's just really warm and muggy out there, man, it's just incredible to see. So maybe for your next Mother's Day, you can take your spouse or your mom down to Charleston or down to the city of New Orleans for just a lovely event and a lovely date to watch these Formosan termites swarm. So this brings us to the big question: can Formosan termites attack living trees? I work for a tree company. A big part of my job is to coming up with management plans and methods to keep trees healthy. That we're all about the business of keeping trees healthy. So this is a paper that recently came out, and it does a really, really great job of saying exactly what I would want to tell you. In the USA, it is best known as a pest of buildings, that being the Formosan termite, in urban areas. However, Coptotermes formosanus also attacks live trees along streets and in urban parks, suggesting it may be able to invade forests in the United States. I fully assume that a few of you on here are forest managers. So this is something that we absolutely need to be paying attention to. In this paper, they chose two different locations. So north of the city of Charleston, there's a national forest there. And then around the city of New Orleans, they chose some forest plots there. And they found, please don't quote me on the exact numbers, but I believe it's 27% of the forest plots that they surveyed in Charleston were infested by Formosan termites. And then just a little more than 50% in the forest settings around the city of New Orleans were infested. So this paper actually showed that these things are invading forests in the southeastern U.S. as well as our urban street trees. So, you know, in these areas where Formosan termites are known, absolutely please monitor for these insects because it's just another way for them to harbor in areas that they may not be showing up very well yet in city settings or in town settings, but maybe they're going to be in the forest settings first. Also of note, I did my master's at Mississippi State University under Dr. John Riggins. He's the guy in the bottom left-hand corner. Him and I are still very good friends, and a big shout out to him if he's listening. But he did some work with Nathan Little, so he's the lead author on this paper. He's in the center, and Nathan Blunt, he was my other lab mate in the upper left-hand corner with the axe. And they did a nice little study where they actually showed a relationship between Formosan termites and blue stain fungus from bark beetles. And in this study, they had little popsicle sticks, and they had inoculated it with the blue stain fungi, and then they put it on the ground where they know that Formosan termites were present. And they actually found that there was a 5-fold increase of feeding on the popsicle sticks that were inoculated with the blue stain fungus versus those that were not. Nathan Blunt, he also did another study where it wasn't the Formosan subterranean termite, but it was other subterranean termites. He looked at a clear-cut stand around Biloxi, Mississippi, and found that most of the stumps that were left over that had blue stain fungus, a lot of them had termites associated with them as well. So there's this really interesting relationship between Formosan termites seemingly loving wood that has blue stain fungus in it. So we're in the southeast. We have a lot of loblolly pine plantations, a lot of slash pine, and whenever you have an outbreak of bark beetles and you have a lot of blue stain fungus present, I just wonder how much we should be monitoring for Formosan subterranean termites as well, and if these aren't hotspots for those insects to thrive in. So there's a sign and symptom again. Sorry about that. And now we should talk about the tree species that we're most likely to find them in. So I have to give a big shout out to Scott Courtwright. He's the owner of Trinity Tree Service in Baton Rouge. He's been established there for a while. And I got to meet up with him, and a really great guy. And I had to ask him this question of, if I'm going to survey, what trees are the ones that I should really be looking at first? And he said, by far and away, our water oak, Quercus nigra, is the tree to really look in. And an email that he sent me later, which I'm thankful to him for, he said this: largely due to the hollow cavity that forms as the pith and heartwood decay, this tree is really tailor-made for the Formosan termite. So those hollow spaces, it's just an invitation to Formosan termites. Other trees that he commonly sees them in are pecans, American elm, and sweet gums. And then after that, he says, really any trees are vulnerable to this. I have to tell you that I was in Houston recently. I was in Discovery Park, and we had seen an infestation around Monterey cypresses. So they've done a lot of planting of Monterey cypress. And I don't know why I was surprised, but I was pretty surprised. We started peeling back some of the bark at the root flare. And sure enough, we had seen just multiple infestations on different trees of the Formosan termites there. And there's a lot of big live oaks there, and there's also some Mexican sycamores. Didn't see any on the Mexican sycamores, but the live oaks, certainly enough, have seen them. And then also recently, I was in Charleston and Savannah, and some of the live oaks there, I've also seen them in as well. Oh no, that showed up on the wrong slide. So if we're going to talk about treating trees, I've clearly shown and expressed that they do attack living trees, as well as going after some weakened trees by blue stain fungus. There's this question of who can treat them. And this gets really messy, but we're going to walk our way through it. So there's this gray zone, right? So we have these Formosan termites that infest both a house, these structures, as well as trees. And then, of course, the question becomes, if they're in your tree, they're probably in your house because they're just about everywhere. These insects form massive colonies. They're called subterranean for a reason. They do live underground, but they also can live above ground on some of these structures and these trees. But I fully suspect if you find them in your house, there's a pretty good chance that they're in your trees. Or if for the first time you find them in trees, I would be very concerned about your house and be calling somebody to probably exterminate them very quickly. So the licensure gets really messy, and this is because it's an individual state by state thing. So I hate slides with a lot of words. I'm a picture guy, so I'm really sorry there's so many words here. But I think it's important just to point out that, you know, if you're going to be treating trees, you absolutely need to be contacting your individual state's licensure, the registry, to find out who's legal in your state. And the wording around Formosan termites is really, really hard to translate. So I've actually started reaching out to certain states. In the state of Florida, you absolutely have to have your wood decaying license, but it is possible to subcontract out a certified operator with that category license if you're going to treat trees. But again, by all means, please contact the people first in your area. Fortunately, in the state of South Carolina, the regulation is done actually through the land-grant university, which is Clemson University. And the way that I interpreted it sounded like we might be okay, but I just wanted to double check. And so we do have this clear answer in South Carolina, where he responded, yes, your company's current Category 3 turf and ornamental license will more than suffice, specifically for treating trees for Formosan termites. When it comes to structure, I have to admit, I don't know much about structural pests. But I'm also going to branch out and say, you know, structural people, they're not dealing with a biological organism, a living organism such as a tree. It's actually, I would argue, quite a bit more complicated. There's a lot more things to consider. So I don't think legally that they should be treating or can treat trees with just a structural license. I think an understanding of these biological organisms is really important. But I was very grateful to Dr. Wayman for getting back to me with this response. So we have a very clear answer, at least in South Carolina, as well as the state of Louisiana. So this gentleman, he sent me back this email, and he said that our commercial pesticide applicator Category 3 license, ornamental and turf pest control, is also good to treat living trees and trees for Formosan termites. But again, we have no desire to be treating structures. So I think there's a really good opportunity there. You know, if you're somebody that is with a tree company or you own a tree company, there's some really good relationships to be built. I think communicating with your local pest control companies and just saying, look, we don't want to treat structures. That's what you want to do. And by all means, we want you to do that. So that communication back and forth of, you know, let the tree companies treat the trees and let the structural companies treat the structures, and forming these relationships can be a really healthy thing, and can also be really good. So at least for 2 states, we have a little bit of answer, so that question mark begins to disappear. So the turf and ornamental licenses are good for Louisiana and South Carolina. I'm currently working in Texas. Right now what we're hearing is that the wood decaying organism license is required to treat trees. And if you're going to treat trees, you have to have somebody with them on site. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip of water. So when we think about social organisms, there is something that they do that we can use to our advantage. And this is called trophallaxis, which is the exchange of food, liquid, or other materials between those social organisms. So when we think about treating termites, we can actually use this biological characteristic for our own good. So this is a short video. The sound isn't going to work, but fortunately it's in subtitles. This video comes from Vietnam, and it's just hilarious. Excuse me. You have to excuse, there is one curse word in there that is started out, and I apologize for that, on a public forum. But I think this video does a really beautiful job of explaining what trophallaxis is and how a lot of treatments for termites work. Oh, sorry, I tried to mute me to make sure I wasn't ruining sound, and it restarted.
Yeah, this is still pretty even without this sound. Jacqueline. These effects.
All right, so that's the video. So as you can see, a termite may not die right away if it carries that product back, and it can actually spread that product throughout the colony. So just using the insect's biology against itself. And I thought that video did a really great job of doing that. So maybe you'll share that video with some friends. So the active ingredient that we currently use, I would say most widespread in the industry, is fipronil. The product that we currently use is Termidor. There's plenty of other products that contain fipronil. This is just the one that we currently use. And when it comes to any pesticide, we always get the questions, is it safe to use around my kids, around my pets? And that is an absolutely important question. And this is a product that, or an active ingredient that we can actually feel pretty good about because it's also the active ingredient that is in a lot of your pet's products to keep ticks and lice away. So this is one that we can be pretty confident about. And, so whether it's a structural treatment, for those of you who are structural folks, or a wood treatment, a tree treatment, that's one we can feel good about. So when it comes down to actual treatment, there's a couple of different ways to do that that the label allows for. The first one being a soil drench. So this is one that we really like to do. So in the bottom left-hand corner, there's kind of our truck. Show it right now. The young man, he is putting the active ingredient into a tank and agitating it. And then in the right-hand side, the young man with the termite coming down his neck. And then there's me off to the side, just watching him work hard. But the label says that you should be about 3 inches from the trunk, and then every time that you put the probe into the soil, you should be about no more than 12 inches away from the last one. I'll go over how to measure on the next slide, how much you would put into the ground. But then you can also do a foliar application. So whenever you're surveying for the Formosan termites, you really want to bring back the root flare. So especially so many trees on the urban landscape, they're what we call lightning poles. You can't even see that root flare because those trees were improperly planted. So really bringing back that root flare and looking in that zone, and then just kind of digging around that root flare is a great way to monitor and survey for Formosan termites. But also on the tree itself. So for example, that southern magnolia that I showed a picture of earlier, there's places on that tree where the bark was actually cracking off, and you could just kind of take it apart cubicle by cubicle, and underneath those little cubes of bark were Formosan termites. So as well as the soil drench, the label also allows for foliar applications. I guess you would call this a bark spray application. But so that way you can do a direct application to where you know that you're seeing it, or on the mud tubes, as well as the soil. So if you're going to do the soil application, you would put in about 4 gallons of this product per 10 linear feet. I know we're really getting to the weeds here, but I think it's at least worth to talk about. And they say measured as the circumference. I'm a forestry guy. I came from forestry, so my mind really works in diameter, not circumference. But it's not that hard to transfer. So if you have your diameter tape, then you just get the radius, and you can get your circumference. And then there's this big question with treatments, and that is a foaming agent required? So if you went on YouTube and you looked up Formosan termite treatments, you're going to find a lot of videos of people saying that a foaming agent is required. Especially, in the 90s, you'll find a lot of Australian videos of them showing you how to do foaming applications. And our company as well, Bartlett, I mean, we used to put a copper tubing into the tree, and then the thought was every year we could come back and just use that same copper tube. But if it's a healthy tree, there should be a wound that closes around that tube and you won't be able to use it again. And there's also the fact that you're opening up a wound. So anyway, point being that when I went to Dr. Greg Henderson, he is the expert on Formosan termites. I asked him this question of, is a foaming agent required for each tree? Do we need to be drilling into trees and putting in these tubings and really getting those cavities? And his answer came back to be no, that a foaming agent isn't required. That being said, if you do have a tree like this where you do have a big open cavity, go ahead and use that foam. Because if it is a really large cavity within that tree and you have an open access to it, that foam does do a really nice job of expanding and getting within that cavity and really taking care of that colony. So if you're to do that, at least the Termidor label, they're going to have you do a 0.125%, which comes out to about 1.6 ounces per gallon. And when it comes to efficacy, so that's going to be the big question of, if I do this treatment, how well is it actually going to work? And I think there is this really nice example from the Polyhill Arboretum, which is also in Baton Rouge. So I had a really nice trip when I went down to Louisiana and learned a lot about them. And at the Polyhill Arboretum, I learned that they had treated quite a few trees for Formosan termites, really just with that soil application of a fipronil product. And about a couple years later, I think it was 3 years, a pretty big windstorm, maybe even a hurricane, came through. And they found that every one of those trees that had been treated remained standing, but there was quite a few trees that were down in this gully, and even some that weren't in the gully, that weren't treated. And it turns out that those trees were infested with Formosan termites, and those are the trees that fell. So I think there was some pretty large cherry bark oak that came down in that storm. So the lesson that we learned while we were down there is that you can actually get multiple years of protection with a single application. But the most important thing is that these trees and structures, whatever you're treating for Formosan termites, needs to be monitored. So, if you own a company, I think it's absolutely vital that part of your program on top of the treatment, if you're going to sell a contract, is the follow-up monitoring. Whether that's 3, 6, 9 months later, or if it's just a year, but going back with that client, looking at the tree and making sure that that colony hasn't reinfested is really important. But from at least the witness testimonies that I've heard, a single application can give you multiple years of efficacy. And when it comes to monitoring, just to go back to some of those pictures that I showed with the mud tubes, with those wings and those spider webs, and then there's also multiple types of monitoring systems. So that picture on the right-hand side, that's what we call a centricon station. So there's actually a termite bait in there. So this is something that goes directly into the ground. I just recently learned about another monitoring station that you can actually put in a box, and it goes onto a tree or into your house, and it draws them in, and it actually also contains an insecticide. So that trophylactic interaction between the termites, they're going to go to that bait station. You can monitor how much they fed on it, and then it's also going to help take care of that colony. So there are multiple ways to monitor, and I just think it's an absolutely critical part of the management of these insects. So with that, I'm just going to put up my contact information. It's 1:47, so I just want to make sure to leave a little bit of time for questions. And I really appreciate everybody listening to this. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Chase, for such an excellent presentation. I know I learned a ton, and it was super entertaining as well. Loved your graphics. Sorry to
Thank you.
everybody. I really wish we could hear that audio. I, for one, will be looking up that video and posting it on our webinar portal because I need to see it in all of its glory. That was very well produced.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's still some questions coming in, but I'm going to go ahead and get started with what we have here now. Oh, Dr. Chase, you are getting some excellent feedback as well. So folks are very pleased.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, so all right, this is kind of so these termites infect green tree tissue only, or can they move from dead wood into green wood on the same tree?
I would say it's much more likely that they're going to move from the dead wood into the green wood. So a perfectly healthy tree that does not have any decay or any cavities, that's not going to be a preferred tree by a Formosan termites. They're really looking for that tree with pockets of decay, or if they're moving subterraneanly underground between trees, they're going to start on some of that dead tissue at the base. So yeah, that's what you're looking for, is that dead tissue in trees.
Excellent. Do termites do anything to help soil quality?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
If I'm being completely honest, I don't know if I am the best person to answer that. I don't know of any data that shows one way or the other. I'm sorry for that. I'm going to write that down as something to look up.
Same. That's a great question. Thinking outside the box, it never occurred to me. Spread. Oh, okay. This is interesting too. The same person asked, can root damage from silvicultural thinnings spread the infestations? And this kind of goes off of another question I got. Can tree injury attract more termites?
Sure. So the first question, again, don't really have any great data for. Just going off of what I know about their biology, I would suspect yes. But again, don't have any data to show that definitively. Can you repeat the second part of the question again? Oh,
Yeah,
it was about attraction.
Right.
Yes. Again, from what I know, this is not like a bark beetle or an ambrosia beetle that is going to be cued in onto those volatiles, whether it's just those terpenes, that nice pine smell that attracts insects to stress trees. It's more about the cavity and those spaces. And something else to think about, in a forest setting where we don't have the man-made little mini moons, the times that they're really going to be coming out and swarming is during full moon. So if you think about, their evolutionary history, that was kind of the big cue for them was, it makes sense that if you live most of your life underneath the ground or inside of a tree, not in daylight, you're going to be looking for that one social cue where everybody can come together at that same point in time. So I think, for you foresters out there, that's what you're really going to be looking for, is in May and June, looking for that full moon and going out and surveying your forest lands. So I think it's less about the tree attraction, a damaged stress tree, as opposed to just the openings and the wounds.
That's an excellent answer. That is fascinating. So, can homeowners do anything to protect their structure or their trees when, say, we're getting that first rain event near Mother's Day, or the full moon's coming up in May or June? Are there any steps people can take to protect their home?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this fipronil product, just kind of like the soil injections that I talked about around trees, they do the same thing around structures. In Louisiana, they also do the same thing around telephone poles, really any wooden structure. So, I would highly recommend you to call your exterminator, your local exterminator, and get your house treated and make sure that those preventative treatments are there. And for trees, we don't do a lot of preventative treatments because if that was the case, I mean, for the entire city of New Orleans or the entire city of Charleston or the entire city of Atlanta and Columbia, I mean, we can't go around treating every single tree. But if we are on a property that we know one tree has it, I absolutely do not think it's unethical or unreasonable to preventatively treat some of those other trees around that spot of infestation.
Excellent, excellent. I think you sort of answered this during the earlier presentation, but I think it would be good to reiterate. So, do you recommend treating the termites for treating for termites yourself? The question asker says, I currently have a company treating for eastern subterranean, but would like to do it myself if possible.
Hmm. So again, I'm just not a structural person. Um, and I think having an understanding of the licensing is really important. I am all about, the folks that like to do the DOI, the do it yourself. And there are certainly a ton of products. You can go to Amazon right now and buy a fipronil product, or you could go to, the do my own pest services. And so can you? Absolutely. I mean, there's many ways for you to get a hold of that product. Uh, what I would just say is 100% the label is the law. Please read the entire label and make sure that you're making the application in accordance to that label. Because the label does two things. One, it legally protects you if something goes wrong. And two, it tells you where and how you should be making the application. So, if somebody wants to invest the time, energy, and money into learning how to properly do it, I say go for it. Otherwise, I would hire a structural pest company that knows exactly what to look for, how to monitor for it, and where the application should be made.
That's very well said. And I think I'll just tag this one on. Someone asked with fipronil, what are the application limitations near bodies of water? Dr. Chase, you may know that directly, but also just to say, with all of these applications, the label is law and they will specify that on the label. So that's where you want to check and be extra careful if you are going to go ahead and try and do this yourself. Did you have anything to add to that, Dr. Chase?
So to the water, there is a limitation. Each label will say individually. So with the Termidor, we are restricted where we can do the soil application within so many feet of it. I don't want to say off the top of my head just because I don't want to be wrong about that, but it is directly on the label as far as the exact linear foot away from the body of water.
Okay, great. Okay, changing directions here a little bit. Do Formosan termites exist in the same areas as other types of termites?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's going to be an important thing is, when I went over the identification, looking at their heads. So in the city of New Orleans, and even in some trees, you can find some other native subterranean termites. Their heads going to look a little bit differently. The swarming of a lot of our native subterranean termites is actually during the day. So that's a really important difference. Maybe something I should have pointed out earlier is that Formosan termites, we expect them to swarm in at dusk and dawn. So as the sun is setting, we're looking around those lights for Formosan termites. But in the middle of the day, when it's really hot in the summertime, is if you see termites and you see them with wings, the alates, you can be sure that that's a native. So yeah, it's really important to be able to identify the different types of termites in the southeast because they can co-occur and they will be from one tree to the other in the same area.
Excellent. Excellent. Do the termites prefer hardwoods versus pines? Did I drop out? Can you hear
Answer
me
that
okay?
sufficiently.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually didn't hear you. Maybe the other folks did. Do you mind repeating that?
So that may have lost Malia. I'll see if I can get on and see
Okay.
if I look at the questions.
Testing? Testing? Oh,
I see the question there. Can everybody still hear me? If somebody could just real quick write in the Q&A that you can still hear me, I just want to make sure.
for heaven's sake.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. Uh, great. Yeah. So I see the question: do fire ants attack Formosan termites? I have actually seen a few instances where where there's ants attacking Formosan termites. So I don't think that they would play very well together, and I do think fire ants attack Formosan termites. Whether they replace them or not, that is something that I guess I really can't answer. Do Formosan termites and other termites fight if they come across each other? So that's a similar question. I've not seen any fighting between Formosans and natives. Um, yeah, I guess I don't know the full answer to that question. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me yet?
There you are. Hi,
Any
Molly.
chance?
Yep.
Nice. Hi, everyone. My bandwidth was struggling. I'm back.
Good.
That
I was
was
trying to
that
hold it
was really
together.
excellent. You did such a great job on the fly. That was incredible. Um, Definitely a pro we have on our hands here. Oh, what does Formosan mean?
uh, so again, so Formosa refers to the island of Taiwan. So that's where Formosan comes from, is the geographical reference.
Okay. Um, some folks are wondering, where do you find water oak? I guess regionally, I know that that these termites prefer humid areas, but since that's one of the most commonly attacked ones, yeah.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. Quercus nigra water oak is very common in the southeast United States. So I'm from Pennsylvania originally. I never saw a native water oak while I was up there. I think in Virginia and the coastal areas, but once you get more into the Appalachians, you're not going to see them there. So yeah, really in the warm, humid conditions of the southeast. Yep. And it's a very
Okay, we
common
only have
tree.
very common tree. Okay, and so if folks were asking, what is the type of tree that these termites would attack in the first line of attack? I guess what do they prefer? It sounds like water oak would be the answer to that.
Yeah. I think water oak is really the answer. Again, going back to they're just really prone to having large pockets of decay and creating these large cavities. So, if you're not sure if they're in your area or if you're trying to monitor a new area, water oaks are certainly the ones that I would look at first. Pecans, again, are another common one where pockets of decay can exist and were quite susceptible to Formosan termites. But really, I mean, just again to reiterate, they can get into just about any tree. We saw a lot of pines in the coastal areas that had them, so it's not just any tree. But those trees that are more prone to having pockets of decay are the ones that you're to look at first.
Very well said. Okay, guys, we have time for just one more, and then we're going to let Dr. Chase go. All right, final question. Is there treatment that is practical for forest-wide landscape areas?
So that's a great question. Um, so I mean, the Fipronil product is the product that I can think of, but we've talked about label is the law, and there is going to be an acreage limit on there. So I guess in that paper I don't remember, and it's just I don't remember them recommending a specific treatment. the one that recently came out. But if I had to give my recommendation, I would say monitor the outer edges, and if you find it, I would treat some of the trees around that outer edge, and just be able to make sure that you stay within those acreage limits of the treatment. Certainly, we can't go around just treating every single tree with it, but treating some of the trees. Yeah, and these colonies are quite large. So if you have, one tree, the neighboring tree is probably part of that colony, and because of that trophylactic biological behavior of these organisms, it'll probably be carrying it around. So that's probably how I would attack that. If you have a 5-acre plot, go around the edges, treat so many of the trees on the outside of that edge, and staying within those legal limits.
Excellent. And I'm glad Evan brought up trophylactic. Make sure you know the definition to that buzzword going into your CEU quiz. Hint, hint. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Chase. This was
Absolutely.
illuminating. This was so much fun. We all thank you so much. Folks, if you do want to reach out, Dr. Chase posted his contact information, and I have it as well. We're going to go ahead and let him go now, but I will stay online for any sort of troubleshooting that comes up as everybody is trying to take their quizzes and get their credits. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Chase.
Absolutely,
You have
yes.
a good day.
And I have to run to catch a plane to Chicago right now, so if I don't answer any of those questions right away, that's why. But it was lovely to
Oh my gosh.
talk to all of you. So we'll see you later. Bye.
Great. Safe travels. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.